In the Bible, the book of Matthew describes 3 wise men as visiting the newborn baby Jesus, each bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They had traveled far from the east, following a star to find him, and their arrival and appearance is treated as a great event, a validation that Jesus is the foretold Messiah. After arriving so spectacularly, they subsequently disappear from the narrative as mysteriously as they had appeared. These wise men are better called by their own name, Magi, which is even the term the writer of Matthew used. They were a group so mysterious and so prevalent in the minds of the Greeks and Romans that their name became synonymous with magic, hence the origin of the word. While mysterious to many today, the Magi were in actuality followers of the most ancient monotheistic religion, carrying on the systematic search for truth, first started by the founder Zoroaster 1500 years before the birth of Christ, and nearly 700 years before monotheism became prevalent among the Jews, at least according to the rough consensus among biblical scholars I've been able to find. This Zoroastrian religion taught that saviors called Saoshyants would arrive periodically to the earth to rid the world of evil, and help bring about the Frasho Kareti, where existence would be renewed and renovated into its best state. These Magi were not that unknown or mysterious to the people of the ancient world. In fact, they were practically famous. They had risen to power as a priestly class in the massive Persian Empire, where they would learn astrology from the Babylonians. They used this art to track the stars for the prediction of the future, especially the arrival of a Saoshyant, which they used, in the story of Matthew, to find the foretold Savior. Although Jesus' non-violent and sacrificial nature clearly subverted their expectation of a benevolent warrior. These Magi were only a sect or denomination of Zoroastrianism. As a whole, Zoroastrianism had a profound effect on Judaism and Christianity, and may have even been their origin, but I'll leave that for each individual viewer to decide. Nevertheless, it is under the Achaemenid dynasty of Persia, a period called Second Temple Judaism, that Jewish religion began to develop strong features like monotheism, an everlasting battle of good versus evil, and an arch-nemesis of God, features present in Zoroastrianism centuries before. Yet, the denomination of the Magi was one that had combined the Zoroastrian religion with their existing polytheistic beliefs. And the founder of the religion, Zoroaster, was in fact named Zarathushtra, and he deserves to be called a philosopher long before being called a prophet. His ethical philosophy and rational religious teachings led to his followers creating a web of different traditions that influenced the Jews during the Second Temple, and perhaps even taught the Greeks philosophy, at least according to Roman historians like Pliny the Elder. There is some evidence of this fact. The Greek word philosophy, meaning roughly brotherly love of wisdom, bears a close resemblance with the Zoroastrian name for the religion, Mazda, which in the Avestan language means veneration of wisdom, wisdom being the name Zarathustra chose for God. While the most famous philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle only show light Zoroastrian influences, earlier ones like Heraclitus often show heavy influences. Yet who was Zarathustra, and what did he teach? And why have so few people heard of him outside a book by Nietzsche? It is unknown when Zarathustra existed, and wildly different estimates have been given by the ancient Greeks, later Zoroastrians, and early Western scholars. Yet, unlike any other religious founder from before the modern era, we have the actual words of Zarathustra and a way he designed them to last forever. He composed 17 poems, or songs, called the Gathas, which take up roughly 10,000 words in English. They were then memorized and carried on for over 1,000 years before being written down. It is in the language and content of the Gathas that we are able to roughly understand when and where he lived. Through linguistic analysis and comparison to the Rig Veda, the founding text of Hinduism, we have been able to determine it was composed roughly in eastern Iran, roughly around 1500 BCE, emphasis on the roughly. The society in which Zarathustra lived had recently split from the Rig Vedic society, yet was nearly identical. The Gathas are also mantras, or mantras, which at the time were non-rhyming poetry intricately crafted to contain deep, thought-provoking truths. They only later became known as short recitations with magical powers. The idea was that a person would memorize a poem and then repeat it throughout their life. Over time, they would continue to find deeper and deeper truths contained within the poem, which has been proven by linguists like Professor Martin Schwartz. Composing such a complex philosophical and poetic work with strict meter likely required extensive training, so it may be that he was either a priest or had been trained to be one. Yet, what he began to teach was radically different from his current society, and even from modern versions of monotheism. More so, the truths and rational understanding contained are of great magnificence and deep philosophical importance. To start from the beginning, Zarathustra understood reality to be underlied by a set of laws that dictated how the universe worked. This encompassed the cosmos, the activities of the gods, and even the lives of the humans and material world. A simple word was used for this: Asha. While this word may roughly mean truth, it means truth as in the ultimate truth of all of reality. This wasn't necessarily a unique idea of Zarathustra's. It exists in the Rig Veda and modern Hinduism as Rita, and the Mesoamericans may have had a somewhat similar idea. Even today, scientists and philosophers like to talk of a similar idea, often summarized as the laws of the universe. Yet Zarathustra understood this order of existence, as Asha is perhaps best described, as entirely wholly good. This may have been prevalent in theory as well, yet, unlike anyone else, he couldn't accept this wholeheartedly. He saw the priests of his time supporting evil and destructive princes who would oppress their citizens and raid innocent neighboring tribes. He also heard many stories expressing the cruelty of the gods of his society, gods who were purported to be benevolent shining beings who ruled existence in the sky, and sustained the order of existence for the priests and princes to rule beneath on earth. Yet these gods were vindictive and selfish, and caused great harm amongst each other. One only needs to read Greek mythology to get a decent idea of his grievances against them. Moreover, they also supported the rulers of his society, who caused massive destruction, violence, oppression, and raiding. I like to imagine that at some point in his priestly training, Zarathustra came to realize the society he lived in, and perhaps the world at large, was infested with the great evil, and he turned against it, abandoning his priestly training to discover the truth, and to discover whether the order of existence, which was supposedly all good, could really allow such a reality. It is hard to say exactly what happened next, and the hundreds of hours I've spent in the Gathas have not given me a good answer. Either Zarathustra had some sort of divine revelation, or he spent this time formulating his philosophy. The reason it is hard to say is because Zarathustra is not clear. In poetic repetition, he describes this turning point as when he approached me with good thinking. And when he talks about Lord Wisdom, his name for God, he often describes visions of the creation of existence. Yet good thinking, which I'll describe later, is a very intellectual process, so perhaps it is a metaphor for understanding the truth of reality. Yet Zarathustra left this vague, and in the spirit of Manthros, perhaps one day it'll become clear to some student. I think it is more likely he had some sort of revelation. A revelation which showed him the true ethical nature of reality. A revelation which showed him the end for all of reality. And a revelation that showed him there was one creator of everything. That being the maker of the world, the father of the order of existence, the establisher of good thinking, Lord Wisdom. In Zarathustra's mind, Lord Wisdom, or Mazda Ahura, was the wholly good creator of the order of existence, through which reality would progressively advance towards its best state. Yet this had not happened yet, and reality was full of evil. The priests and princes still existed, and they wrought destruction in the name of their gods. In a more general sense, the world was full of unethical, short-sighted people whose self-interest held back the world from reaching perfection. How could this be the case if the order of existence, as well as Lord Wisdom, are all good? Well, the answer is actually simple if you're outside of an Abrahamic belief system. The idea that Lord Wisdom is all-powerful is never even considered, neither by Zarathustra nor by later priests. Wisdom is the creator of everything good and beautiful and meant to be enjoyed, but not all-powerful. To quote the great scholar of Zoroastrianism, K.D. Irani, "Evil cannot be destroyed by command. It is intrinsic to the nature of reality." In Zarathustra's thought, being the creator of Asha and all existence is enough for wisdom. Yet, by his own wisdom, Zarathustra did not leave it at that. Asha, the order of existence, is fundamentally opposed by a concept called Druj, a unique invention of Zarathustra, as was Lord Wisdom. Druj is often described as the lie, and by this, we may be tempted to see the struggle between Asha and Druj as that of the truth versus the lie. While that is not an inaccurate way to view it, we must remember these concepts of truth and lie are very different from our own. Druj is really best translated as the deceit or the deception, the latter of which is my go-to when I am translating the Gathas. As Asha is best described as the order of existence, many I describe this to think that Druj is then disorder or chaos, but that is not true in the slightest. The deception is, in a sense, the false order of existence, or the many false orders we construct to understand and justify our reality. But it is more than that. As a whole, it is an umbrella term for anything that isn't from the wholly good order of existence. It is the source of all evil. Where it comes from isn't said, but the very fact of its existence mandates that Asha hasn't been fully actualized for all of reality. And I believe that is in essence what it really is. Much like dark is the absence of light, the deception is the absence of the totality of the order of existence. The existence of the deception is entirely reliant on the order of existence not being fully realized. Why this is, and why the order of existence wasn't fully actualized at the beginning of creation isn't told to us. I think this is because Zarathustra knows for certain this is the true nature of reality, but perhaps he doesn't know exactly why. He does discuss this as an immutable fact, yet my curiosity has led me to two main theories. The first is that there was a disconnect between Lord Wisdom's envisionment of how the laws of existence would blossom into a perfect reality, and how it actually became on the act of creation. This echoes our own experiences on the fundamental disconnect between our minds and reality. Perhaps then, there was enough small imperfections for Asha to not be fully realized immediately, which led to the existence of the deception, through which us humans are then responsible to choose between the two. This has certainly been the traditional interpretation, but I have another one, and while I tend to favor it, both are very robust. The universe may yet still be in the act of creation, one which will end when existence is made best. The deception is then just where the act of creation has not yet finished, small and large imperfections which will be smoothed over in the end. In both of these accounts, this ethical nature of reality is never made as a deliberate test for humans to choose between good versus evil, and Lord Wisdom is never seen as allowing the deception or evil to exist. That sort of Abrahamic thinking is foreign to Zoroastrianism and does not really belong in a discussion of Zoroastrian philosophy. This understanding of Zarathustra is an absolute first in recorded history. Never has a single prophetic figure emerged with a distinct religious vision. Some may perhaps argue that the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten in the 1300s BCE could have possibly come before, but his religious vision didn't last after his death, and we only have a rough estimate for when Zarathustra lived. After this revelation, Zarathustra then began to see the priests and princes of his society as being followers of the deception, for lack of a better term. He saw them as all having created their own conception of the order of existence, a conception which allowed them to grow rich and famous off of oppression and destruction, a conception from which the gods were born from, as Zarathustra himself describes it. It is in this subtlety that Zarathustra realized the gods were creations of man, not literally schemed out in some dark room, but born out of the worldview of people deceived by the deception. As you can imagine, no one wanted to hear this, and however such revelations got out in the open, they caused Zarathustra to be cast out. He describes it as such: "What land should I flee to? Where shall I go? They exclude me from my family and from my clan. The community I associated with has not satisfied me." He was cast out from his community and forced to live alone with only a few draft animals. He describes in brief moments being denied shelter in the freezing cold. Yet he endured and continued to craft his philosophy and teachings. Eventually, a local ruler named Vishdaspa, inspired by the spirit of right-mindedness, took Zarathustra in and gave him patronage. It was in the court of this prince that Zarathustra finished his philosophy. Whether this philosophy was just his own ideas, or the full interpretation of his previous vision is up for the viewer to decide. Either way, it was here he crafted the Gathas, or as he would have described it, weaved his songs to Lord Wisdom. His daughter Porochista, who he deeply loved, also got married during this time, for which he composed a lovely Gatha to celebrate her wedding. In the end, he chose this Gatha to be the final one, a small look into the life of this humble mantra maker. This is all we can know of Zarathustra's personal life from his own brief mentionings of it. I think he intended his work to be immortalized, and only wanted his most intense emotional experiences to be remembered in subtle references by those who would learn and repeat his message. He didn't want to take away from the importance of his own teachings. As the Gathas were passed on from father to daughter, mother to son, that was all that remained of his life. Many legends were told about him hundreds and thousands of years later, but none of these I find to be based in fact. Zarathustra intended himself to be remembered by his message, and anything about him I haven't been able to glean from his own words has likely been lost to time. Yet his message goes far beyond just Asha and Druj, and while I will attempt to present the rest of his teachings, it is a very complex philosophy that was crafted to hold layers upon layers of deep meaning. I have always found the concept of emergence to be very helpful when trying to understand the philosophy of Zarathustra. In physics, as well as science in general, emergence is when a system or entity arises out from a lower entity containing properties unique to itself, yet derived from properties of that lower system. Ignoring this definitional gobbledygook, an example from physics is that the laws determining the interaction of atoms emerge from the laws of quantum physics. Then, the laws determining molecules emerge, which leads to small, noticeable objects, to planets and solar systems, to galaxies, and so on, each emerging from one another. This idea is also expressed in how each type of scientific field emerges from the other. Physics leads to chemistry, to biology, to psychology, and so on. In the Gathas, the first emergence from the fundamentals of Asha and Druj is the option or pathway to follow one or the other. As reality consists of endless individual entities, whether they be living creatures or inanimate objects, they all, in broad strokes, have pathways laid out in front of them. These being whether they will advance the order of existence or struggle against its fulfillment. Of course, this may sound like I am giving agency to rocks floating around in space, but that isn't the case. These pathways, or perhaps vectors for development, arise from the fundamental aspects of existence, and nothing is free from engaging within them. The word Zarathustra chose for these vectors of moral option is a term called Mainyu, the last hard word to translate. In the context of his time, a Mainyu was an outward mental force that one would adopt by their own life actions, where it would then make up one's behavior. It doesn't necessarily have agency, it more so exists as an outside option for one's mentality. I assume this word had a broad usage at his time, but the concern here is with the two fundamental ones. Now, there are two original mentalities that are twins, renowned to be in conflict. In both mind and word, in action, these two are the more good and the bad. And between these two, the beneficent rightly choose, not the malicious. We should then understand these two mentalities as emergent from Asha and its opposite, which is definitely hinted at in multiple places. But the subtlety in which he describes them gives us another example of emergence. That is good and bad, good versus evil. If we understand the twin Mainyus to be future pathways of moral action, then the actual action taken would then be good or evil. Of course, this isn't wholly binary. In the subtlety of the differing terms used to describe them, we can understand good and evil exist on a spectrum. While these two mentalities don't have exact names given by Zarathustra, in later times they came to be known as Spenta Mainyu and Angra Mainyu. But by and large, both from Asha versus Druj and from the struggle of the twin Mainyus, does a concept of good versus evil emerge. Yet, this isn't some everlasting struggle with no end, where good and evil are matched in strength. In fact, neither good nor evil are fundamental at all. Instead, they have arisen from the uncertainty of whether the order of existence will be wholly realized. There in fact lies an asymmetry between good and evil, an idea never forgotten by Zoroastrians. If you haven't noticed it already, this is because good comes from the very laws of the universe, the underlying order which makes things tick, but evil only comes from its not yet being realized. This is what good and evil truly are in the mind of Zarathustra. We can also understand that good inevitably will overcome evil, because evil is only the absence of good, Druj the absence of Asha, and certainly the order of existence will inevitably be fully realized, even if it requires us humans to intervene. From this true nature of good, we can understand the worldview of later Zoroastrians. They viewed the natural world as being fundamentally good and worth being enjoyed. Worldly pleasures, without overindulgence and without harm to others, were seen as the order of existence being fulfilled in certain areas. So creating, seeking, and enjoying the good were in fact religious actions. Asceticism was looked down upon as foolish, and the pursuit of happiness and the embracing of the material world as good were of the utmost value. We can even see this in many of the Persian kings, often inscribing a variation of this phrase. A great god is Ahura Mazda, who created this earth, who created yonder sky, who created man, who created happiness for man. As the Persian Empire was Zoroastrian, many of the kings often exhibited a strong understanding of ethical behavior, despite what ancient Greek propaganda from a two-sided war would lead one to believe. They rarely engaged in slavery. They viewed women as equal, allowing them to work in and own businesses, and work in construction for equal pay. They also respected every religion, and they venerated and promoted the multi-ethnic nature of their empire. When Cyrus the Great established the empire, he honored the local gods and freed the people from their bonds, and allowed local rulers to rule underneath him. He also spoke of how he treated civilians honorably and established his empire with peace when possible. I took up my lordly abode in the royal palace amidst rejoicing and happiness. My vast army marched into Babylon in peace. I did not permit anyone to frighten the people of Sumer and Akkad. I sought the welfare of the city of Babylon and all its sacred centers. I relieved their weariness and freed them from their service. Marduk, the great lord, rejoiced over my deeds. We see here he respected the beliefs and religion of the Babylonians. And he did the same with the Jews, who in the book of Isaiah even praised him as a Messiah for freeing them from the Babylonian captivity and paying to rebuild their temple. While we shouldn't see the Persians as perfect, we can understand they at least had a strong understanding of Zarathustra's conception of good and evil, but they would stray from it as they deemed necessary, as the later kings were oft to do. Yet they still hung on to that moral imperative of perfecting the world. The natural world was also seen as sacred. Zoroastrianism has frequently been described as a first environmental religion, and this is hard to argue against. From surviving accounts, the Persians would build their cities away from rivers so as not to pollute them with waste. They would often place their dead in predetermined areas where the animals would feast on them, giving back to the earth. This is likely because they saw the natural world as Asha already being realized, and harming and polluting the earth would be working against it. They also built very many walled gardens called paradises, where we get our word paradise. The story of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon was that it was built for a Median princess, the Medes being cousins to the Persians and Zoroastrians. It was said she missed the gardens in her homeland so much, the Babylonian king made a magnificent garden to ease her homesickness. The Persian kings would later build these all over the place, even bragging about how good at gardening they were. It seems these paradise gardens were an attempt to create heaven on earth in essence, and to demonstrate they were dedicated to advancing the order of existence. While the twin mentalities exist for all of reality, it is only humans that have the ability to choose. In the history of the universe, humans are unique as they have thinking and reasoning abilities. It is this ability that is central to engaging in Zarathustra's teachings, and dictates the central religious obligation of anyone who would call themselves Zoroastrian. Outside of Lord Wisdom and Asha, this is the most venerated term in the Gathas. It is called good thinking, or the good mind. We must understand that there are no prescriptions in Zarathustra's thought, There is no list of rights and wrongs. In fact, such a thing would be contrary to his teachings. This is because Asha must be discovered and searched after. As far as I am able and strong, long will I search in quest of Asha. This sentiment is echoed often and is enshrined in the very understanding of the good mind. Good thinking is an active process of trying to understand the order of existence and what it would look like if it was fulfilled, either in individual circumstances or as a whole. This often can look like a scientific process or a philosophical pondering. We often use good thinking when we are trying to improve a situation. We notice something is flawed, that Asha has not yet been realized, so we then imagine what it would look like if it was. Good thinking is a broad concept, yet is part of what allows Zarathustra's teachings to be so timeless. To those that wish to follow the teachings of Zarathustra, this becomes a moral imperative, one that supersedes any religious or cultural authority. If we begin to accept anything without thinking, we are opening ourselves up to the deception. Yet this good thinking isn't just to protect us, but to improve the world. Some religious people may find this unattractive, as everything becomes uncertain, yet that is the very nature of existence. As Asha hasn't been fulfilled, the deception often looks like Asha. So we must use our minds to parse through the two, and to imagine what the future of the order of existence being totally fulfilled would look like. In our modern age, the importance of good thinking is much greater than in the past, as we have used our thinking, both good, bad, and in between, to understand to a much higher degree the order of existence, or laws of science, if you will. We have been able to create massive scientific wonders. We have produced medicines, skyscrapers, rocket ships, movies, games, nuclear reactors, and more. Yet we have also engaged in wars that have killed millions of people. We have created a worldwide system that exploits poorer countries, and we have created a social and economic system that has left many people unhappy and even mentally ill. As we have so much mastery over the order of existence, we have so much potential to fulfill it, or to let our good minds fall short and allow the deception to flourish by denying the ultimate ethical nature of the universe. We can do this by letting science inform our thinking, when necessary, as it, along with philosophy, history, and other modes of factual learning, are our best attempts at understanding the truth. Yet, while many see science as inherently non-moral, Zarathustra tells us that the laws of science, Asha in his understanding, is wholly good when fully realized. Yet when looking at it in pieces, one can either bring it closer to its inevitable good end, or to not fully grasp it, and in turn bring about the deception, and in turn violence, destruction, and oppression. This is why Zarathustra's teachings are anti-prescriptive. Reality is constantly changing and progressing, and the context of one generation changes. Asha can never be fully understood by one person or group. While there is ultimately only one Asha, one truly good and evil, none of us will be able to ultimately know what they are. We are all on a journey of discovery through the use of our good minds. Yet, using the good mind like this would be exhausting if we did it constantly. And there must be more. Zarathustra tells us that Lord Wisdom has 7 aspects or traits which constitute his person, and which also exist in humans more or less developed. The first of these traits is in fact good thinking, yet the whole list gives an in-depth system to aid mankind in the perfections of themselves and the world. In total, the actualization of the order of existence. The next is right-mindedness. This is the instinct within that inspires us to do what is right, without thinking. Often colloquially mentioned as a spirit of right-mindedness. This is something that Zarathustra says must grow within us. He often opines that he wishes it to spread amongst the people. If this has been developed well within us, we then are inspired to help, to love, and to improve when we notice wrong. There is a sort of benevolence and progressively expanding nature to it as well. There is Asha itself, often called in this context the best Asha. Here, we can understand it as the realization of the order of existence within oneself. This touches every single one of the 7 aspects, but also other areas like our physical and mental health. Our hobbies and trades as well need be affected by Asha, because not only will they affect good in the world, but they'll also be their best possible versions. It is important to realize that every good action needs to be weighed against the good of the individual. Self-sacrifice and selflessness are not typically praised in Zoroastrianism, and usually only when there is no other option. It is Asha that reminds us we are a part of a whole, and that our own good is just as important as others. Yet Asha must be worked toward within our own societies. This leads us to the good rule or the rule to be chosen, often paired with Asha and good thinking in the Gathas, which are the ways we work towards accomplishing this. The good rule is mainly our own societies. Whether we have autocrats or elected representatives, in the end, it is humans making decisions to rule over us, and they must use their good thinking to understand how Asha be best realized in their society. Yet the rule to be chosen is more than just rulership. As members of societies, we are responsible to use our mind to evaluate whether our societies benefit everyone, or whether they oppress or harm people. The good rule can be applied to areas lower than society as well, even down to our own minds. Hence, one's own personal good rule would be the one in which they are free from subconscious influences hurting them and hindering their good mind. While this is not how we think of mental health, it is, in a sense, how Zarathushtra likely viewed it. We also have Spenta Manu, or the benevolent mentality. This is the good of the two twin Manus, but it also exists as something we hold within ourselves. This benevolent mentality encompasses all of our actions and behaviors as a whole, and is the sort of way of being we should seek to cultivate within ourselves. This is the creative force that enables us to progress reality to its ideal existence, and it is also how Zarathustra describes Lord Wisdom as creating existence. Finally, we have the pair of wholeness and immortality. These are seen as the end-of-life rewards one may receive for living a good, beneficial life. They also are something one cultivates throughout their own life. Yet they give us a glimpse of what the afterlife will be like, an afterlife in which everything is made whole, complete, and lasts forever. With these 7 aspects, we have a brief glimpse of the full ethical system Zarathustra gave toward achieving good and resisting the deception of choosing evil. Yet, what is the afterlife like? Does one have to believe in God to enter? Will those who don't believe in God, or happen to like the same gender as their own, be sent to some sort of hell? While heaven and hell are not in Zoroastrianism or Zarathustra's teachings, the general idea of a good and bad afterlife based on one's behavior is a Zoroastrian invention. What they are exactly is hard to say, and Zarathustra only gives us vague metaphors. But Zarathustra describes the afterlife as the ultimate compensation for one's behavior in life, seen as whether one was a follower of Asha or a follower of the deception. This applies to all people for all time, regardless of their knowledge or belief. It does not require one to choose to believe in God or Lord Wisdom. It only measures one's ethical behavior in life, regardless of their creed. Moreover, since Zarathustra is against prescriptions, our understanding of good and evil over time allows us to discover whether the LGBT or other historically maligned people would get into heaven, for lack of a better term. In this current age, only a severe lack of good thinking would cause someone to say the LGBT would not get into heaven. This sort of thinking is not popular with religious authorities, but to be a Zoroastrian, one must approach every matter this way. Anything less would be from the deception, rather than from the order of existence. Concerning the final end for the ethical person, Zarathustra describes it as a house of song, the house of the good mind. In other places, he refers to it as the happiness mixed within the stars, and later Zoroastrians even described it as the endless light's paradise. I don't think Zarathustra knew for certain, yet the metaphors he gave show how he thought of it. The final end for the unethical is described as a house of the worst mind, but I feel Zarathustra describes it best in a warning given to a group of young adults at a wedding party. These things are exactly true, men, exactly, women. There is a follower of the deception when you see someone prospering from the deception. Foul food shall be for these people, as they cry woe. In that, happiness has been lost to the unethical, who violate the order of existence. While I feel I have barely scratched the surface, there is one more thing I wish to impart, and that is of the final end. There is no great battle of Armageddon, no climatic fight between the forces of good and evil. Instead, Zarathustra tells us that in the end, existence will be made new, made fresh. It will be renovated. All these are different ways of understanding Frashukareti, the final end for existence. Yet this is not when Lord Wisdom finally comes down, slays the evil mentality, and establishes his reign. It is instead when Asha is fully realized, perhaps by the aid of mankind, for all of existence. Zarathustra says we live in the first existence, the one created at the beginning, yet within lies the potential for the best existence. the one in which the order of existence has been actualized completely. To do this, we each must attain the 7 aspects of Lord Wisdom for ourselves, and use our good thinking to fully comprehend the order of existence. Once this has been done, and our current existence has been renewed, then we'll all live in the best existence, both individually and collectively. Although Zoroastrianism was nearly brought to extinction by the rise of Islam, this concept still exists today in the New Year celebration of Iran. The festival Nowruz, meaning New Day, was originally a Zoroastrian holiday in which they treated the coming of spring as a vignette of the ultimate coming renewal, of which they all were working toward, day by day. The festival was never forgotten by the people, even though the teachings of Zarathushtra were, and they carried it on. Today, it is celebrated by over 100 million people every year. Just a small example of the vast amount of legacies left by this ancient thinker, philosopher, and teacher. I hope you have enjoyed this video. It is one of the products of my hundreds of hours of research into the Gathas of Zarathustra and Zoroastrianism in general. If you'd like to see more videos on this topic, or just by me in general, please subscribe so I can gauge the demand. Besides this video, I have currently been learning the language of the Gathas and translating them. All translations of Zarathustra in this video were either done by me or adapted by me from Dr. Stanley Enzo to be more accurate with key terms. Although the Islamization of Persia/Iran led to Zoroastrianism no longer being one of the world's largest religions, it was never fully extinguished and has carried on into this present day. There are currently roughly 200,000 official Zoroastrians, although there may be many more among the Kurds living in Iraq, as well as Iranians in general who hide it due to the fear of persecution or even execution, as converting from Islam when born into it is heavily punished in certain countries. It is very true you don't need to believe in Ahura Mazda to get into heaven, and in the Yasna ceremony, the righteous religions of the world are praised. If you would like to learn more, I have linked multiple resources, as well as a place to reach out if you are interested in the religion. I will also put some further reading, although much of it is academic sources that may require hunting down PDFs. I hope I have brought you wisdom, my friend. Hashem Vahu.